Heidi ho, boys and girls. This is part one of a four-part installment on unemployment. So first we'll look at the definition and measurement of unemployment. The basic economic definition of unemployment is a situation where a resource, predominantly here we're talking about labour, but in theory it can be labour, land, or machinery. Anyway, where a resource is willing and able to work, but is not currently working, not currently being employed in exchange for remuneration in order to produce goods and services. Now, that in general terms is what we mean as economists by unemployment. Governments have more specific definitions than that, and here we're talking about labour in particular. So here are some definitions that we need. The first is participation. So participation in the labour force refers to those civilians in the population who are over the age of 15 who are in the labour force. If they're in the labour force over the age of 15, they're civilians, then we say they are participating. Doesn't mean they're employed, doesn't mean they're unemployed, it just means they're participating in some way. What's the labour force then? Well, the labour force is just made up of all those who are employed and all those who are unemployed. So what do we mean by employed then? An employed person is a civilian who is over the age of 15, who is legally employed for at least 1 hour per week in paid or unpaid work. An unemployed person is someone who is over the age of 15, who is not legally employed, is actively seeking legal work in the reference week in which they are asked by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And they are able to start legal work in the reference week, that is, in the week in which they are asked by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. If you meet those criteria, then you are classified as unemployed. So a person over 15, not legally employed, actively seeking work, and able to start work in the week in which you're asked. So that's our definition of unemployed. So, just to visually represent that, start off with the population. Of that population, there are people who are of working age. That is, people who are over 15 years. So, the rest of the population, sorry, we'll get to them. And of that working age population, some percentage of them makes up the labour force. That is, people who are working or who are actively seeking work and can start work. So we can divide the labour force into the employed and the unemployed. So these people here in the yellow area, they're over the age of 15, they're of working age, but they're not in the labour force. So this is people who are in the armed forces. They're not civilians if you're in the armed forces. So household workers, people who work at home. Not people who work at home, we mean by that people who do housework for free. Full-time students, retirees, the disabled, institutionalised, and discouraged workers. They all fall into that category. They're not in the labour force, but they're over the age of 15. They're of working age. The people who fall into the population who are not of working age, that's basically kids. So the employed are made up of people who are employees, paid employees or unpaid employees, and the self-employed. The unemployed can be classified in all sorts of ways. So we can say that's people who are new entrants into the labour market who are just looking for a job after they left school. Re-entrants into the labour force, so that might be people who were previously working. They left school they left work in order to have a child or something like that, and now they're re-entering the labour force. People who were fired from their jobs for being incompetent or annoying to their employer. People who quit because they found their employer to be too annoying, or they felt that they were not fulfilled in some way in their job for whatever reason, or they had some reason to leave. And those who were laid off. That is, those who were retrenched, not because they were performing badly or their boss didn't like them or something like that, but rather they were laid off because they were surplus to requirements, so to speak. All of those people make up the unemployed. So let's look at some actual data. This is 2011 data. And we can get an idea of what's happening with the Australian labour force. So this is 2011, so it's not completely out of date, it's only a couple of years old. Civilians who are over the age of 15 in Australia, that's 17 million, roughly 900,000. Now of them, 12.3 million are in the labour force in Australia. So we can calculate the participation rate. So remember, the participation rate is simply the labour force divided by the civilians who are over the age of 15, the working age population. So 12.3 million, or 12.4 million really, divided by 17.9 million gives you 69.3%, roughly 70%. So roughly 70% of the working age population is participating in the labour market. They're either employed or they're unemployed. So there's 30% of the working age population who are neither employed nor unemployed. They're non-participants, according to the statistical definitions. So let's break down the labour force. We've got the employed, that's 11.4 million, and the unemployed, 600,000 people, roughly. So we can calculate the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is the number of unemployed divided by the labour force, times 100, of course, if we want a percentage. So that's 600,000 unemployed divided by the total labour force, 12.4 million people, gives us an unemployment rate of roughly 5%. Which is not bad, compared to Europe, say, or most other places, really. In fact, let's make a comparison. So this is 2011. Australia, roughly 4% unemployment. Greece, 2011, its unemployment rate was about 21%. Ireland's was 14.7%. The United States was 8.1%. Turkey's was 8.3%. And Turkmenistan's was 70%. So we are not really, in international terms, entitled to complain bitterly about our unemployment rate. because it would appear, according to our official statistics, to be quite low.